Good morning, everyone. I'm calling to order Marin Water's Watershed Committee and Special Board Meeting of September 18th, 2025. Terry, could we have roll call, please?
Good morning, Director Diana Mayer, Vice Chair Matt Sampson,
Here.
Director Jed Smith,
Here.
Chair Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
and currently not present is Director Larry Russell.
Do we have any board comments on today's agenda? Terry, any public comments on the agenda?
There are none.
Then do we have a motion to adopt today's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Terry, could we have roll call vote, please?
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Vice Chair Sampson,
Yes.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and Chair Kush.
Aye. Any public comments on non-agenda items?
There are none.
Okay, we'll move on to our regular agenda then. The first item is approval of the meeting minutes from our last Watershed Committee and Special Board meeting, which was held on June 12th, 2025, and the minutes are included in today's meeting packet. Any board comments on the meeting minutes? Terry, any public comments on the meeting
There are
minutes?
none.
Do we have a motion to accept the meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Vice Chair Sampson,
Yes.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and Chair Kush.
Aye. Okay, we'll move on to the main agenda item, which is a road and trails management plan update. Sean, before you start us off, I just wanted to make a couple of points. I think most of us understand the motivations for a road and trails management update at this point. Our recent effort to provide more inclusive bicycle access on the watershed was only partially successful. We were able to establish a 2-year e-bike pilot that allows us to evaluate Class 1 e-bike access in all areas that are currently open to regular bicycles, but we were not able to proceed with a pilot that would have allowed us to evaluate bicycles on a selected set of trails. So as a result, I think we agree that a more comprehensive update of our road and trails management plan is the next step. It has become part of the equation. If we achieve a successful update, it will support, I hope, I believe, a programmatic plan for ongoing and long-term improvements in recreation management, including trail access and stewardship. I just want to, for me, an important example of what we might be able to achieve, what I hope we could achieve is our Biodiversity, Fire, and Fuels Integrated Plan, or BIFIP. It was adopted in 2019 and continues to support substantial watershed interventions like brush clearing, prescribed burns, and stream restoration without going back to the drawing board for every distinct activity. I mean, it's pretty amazing, right, Sean? We've just recently had a 23-acre prescribed burn that follows a 40-acre prescribed burn. I think I heard something like in the last year, 12,000 piles were put together of cleared brush and then either burned or still in the process of burning. These are big, large-scale interventions that honestly, I would say in many dwarf some of the changes that we are considering with respect to trail use and the parallel efforts to develop those trails or manage the trails. So, Sean, I'm hoping that integrating relevant components of the recreation feasibility study into an updated road and trails management plan, including new trail classifications and necessary environmental reviews, will support an ongoing and efficient programmatic trail management and stewardship plan that includes bicycle access, essentially functioning like the BIFIP and possibly different from sort of the one-off trail projects like Liberty Gulch. My understanding is that today's meeting is to kick off the process for achieving this programmatic plan. Obviously, we want to get this right, but I also want to emphasize that there's a high urgency and real timeline pressure to moving forward with an updated RTMP. The more time that we spend on the process and the discussions, it's more time that we're not on top of recreation activities on our watershed and on our trails. And ultimately, it's more time that the environment pays the price. So hopefully we are starting the day with an effective but also efficient follow-on to the previous efforts to pilot bicycles. And with that, Sean, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you for that. Good morning, board members. Sean Horn, Director of Watershed Resources. I'm joined with Carly Blanchard, our new environmental planner in our planning division, who's supporting this planning effort. And we put together a presentation that I think speaks to some of the points that were just brought up.
Well, I just want to say welcome, Carly, and you certainly join at an important and interesting time.
So I think the presentation we have today will touch on some of the points that were brought up in your intro. And, yes, this is a continuation of some of the past planning efforts that we're doing, and a really critical one for our stewardship of the watershed. So this morning, the presentation today is going to kind of provide a background of where our roads and trails plan is, what it provides the district with the guidance to do. We'll review our feasibility study that was completed in 2023, and then talk about the key updates that we're identifying as we move forward. And then this meeting specifically is meant to be an opportunity for initial community and board input on how this process unfolds. But we have other touch points that we'll highlight in this presentation as well. So to give an overview of our roads and trails management plan, Carly's going to walk us through what it is, how the district's used it, and why this is an important tool for the management and stewardship of the watershed.
Thank you, Sean. So the Mount Tamalpais Watershed Road and Trail Management Plan was adopted in 2005. It lays out the official road and trails system within the watershed. Thank you. And it defines a work plan that spanned over a century, quarter century. And for the close to 20 years, it has been successful. The district manages approximately 100 miles of roads and 60 miles of trail. And the road and trail management plan focuses on the overriding goal of protecting water quality and the integrity of natural wildlands on the watershed while allowing limited passive recreational access. To dive a bit deeper, the plan has three primary goals: to improve water quality and minimize sediment into creeks and reservoirs, to reduce the impact of the road and trail network on sensitive habitats and special status plants and animals, and to reduce the impact of road and trail network on the watershed's natural ecological function. The road and trail management plan is divided into chapters with key elements including road and trail design standards, work plan guidelines, best management practices and environmental measures, signage, public information and outreach, and road and trail classification. On the right hand of this slide, we have the two tables defining our roads classification and trail classification. It ranges from class 1 to class 10, with road classification from class 1 to class 5. And you can see the different road types with the miles associated. Something to really key in on is for trail classification, or class 10, class X, it was reserved for future definition, and it was never used as part of this planning process.
And I'll just mention, I think it's really important to understand, and I know this slide is hard to read, but the characteristics really define the level of maintenance and work that the district does on different trail systems. And this was a strategy, I think, that was put in place to think about the resources the district has to maintain that system of roads and trails and kind of provide different standards for different types of trails.
The RTMP also established a criteria for ranking non-system routes, also known as social trails. What are social trails? Social trails are unrecognized trails that are not established and not maintained by the district, typically created by curious hikers or recreation users or wildlife such as deer. The RTMP originally identified 50 miles of social trails, but more have since been identified. As part of the RTMP, a decommissioning priority and criteria was developed to target the most significant impact social trails. For example, very high priority social trails included criteria such as moderate or high use, significant environmental impacts, and severe erosion problems. Using the RTMP's high and very high priorities, the district established an effort known as Project Restore. which focuses on removing the most environmentally damaging social trails and has been successfully implemented by communicating official routes to watershed visitors through public outreach platforms, prioritizing district response to non-system trails based on select criteria, developing a range of management guidelines and action for non-system routes, and enforcing strategies to support management actions. To highlight some of the success of the Road and Trail Management Plan's past work, it has reduced sediment inputs into Upper Lagunitas Creek and Redwood Watershed. Thank you. Established and implemented Project Restore, guided decommissioning of redundant fire roads, addressed hydrological connectivity along fire roads through installation of best management practices and improving stream crossings, including culvert replacements, improved fire road surfaces and clearance to maintain access to critical water distribution facilities for emergency response, and maintain trails as needed and address critical failures.
So one thing to point out, the Roads and Trails Management Plan in its current form is an incredible document for allowing the district to protect water quality through doing the type of maintenance that we need to do on our roads, trails, and other visitor facilities. And it allows us to have access to the water infrastructure that's required to deliver water to the community. So the Roads and Trails Plan in its current form, I want to emphasize, provides the tools we need to do that. It's a good document. It was well written, but as we know, and through our discussions with the recreation feasibility study, kind of patterns of use have changed, right? And that's what's kind of driving this discussion around, what kind of key updates can we do? So we're going to walk towards kind of that
Sean, can
discussion.
you just elaborate on something real quick? You said that the types of recreation or use have changed since 2005. Can you give examples, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, e-bikes was like a disruptive type of technology. We didn't see it coming in 2005. E-bike technology kind of has grown in a way that we weren't seeing, 10 years ago even. And now we're thinking about how do we, provide that type of access, as well as the Roads and Trails Management Plan didn't really take into consideration visitor management as much. We had some tools for outreach, like communication with signage, but we didn't think about like, are there other ways that we can manage our roads and trails to support visitors and really understand kind of the loading that's happening on the watershed. We've seen the number of users grow somewhat. We saw that in our 2022 visitor survey that we did. And so, that is different than what 2005 was seeing as well. I would say that, equestrian use was bigger in 2005 and lower now. So that's kind of a change we've identified and noted as well. We've done a lot of improvements to our roads and trails network to support visitors, which is a different condition than we had in 2005 as well.
Great. Thank you for that.
Thank you. We'd also like to point out that the Road and Trail Management Plan also had an associated program environmental impact report, or EIR. The program level EIR evaluated effects associated with the RTMP's actions and included specific mitigation measures to reduce the impact of managing the road and trail network. Both of these documents are available on the district's website as well. And now I'll pass it back to Sean.
Thanks. So that's an overview of kind of what our Roads and Trails Management Plan is. We've been working over the last couple of years with the community and the board on the Watershed Recreation Management Feasibility Study. So we'll just provide kind of a summary of some of the input that we received through that process. And I just want to, first and foremost acknowledge that this was developed as a foundation for this step, right? This was providing that conversation with the community to try to create bridges of between the differences that we do see, understand the interests that various community groups have, and think through how we can kind of come up with some alignment around desired future conditions and how to get there. So we started this back in 2019 when e-bikes became kind of a focus. We started at the board direction with a community advisory committee that explored various areas of interest relating to e-bikes. We did this with some facilitation and came out with a report, brought various options to the board. And the one thing that there wasn't consensus on the approach to move forward with e-bikes, but there was alignment around we should be looking at the watershed in a holistic way, thinking about all visitors. So that led us to our Watershed Recreation Management Feasibility Study. This was supported by individual stakeholder meetings before, during, and throughout the process. We had an initial scoping meeting in May and June of 2021. And then we went through a series of workshops from June 22 to April 2023, focusing in on specific areas for discussion for the community. This was really supported by hundreds of hours of volunteerism from our community to participate in these meetings and provide a deep discussion on current conditions, desired future conditions, and areas that folks wanted the district to hone in on in terms of improvements. So throughout that process, we met and discussed areas of interest, data that could be collected, stewardship programs, the facilities that we have on the watershed. We conducted a visitor census survey to get input from people who are using the watershed on a daily basis, and then talk through adaptive management, and we'll summarize those throughout. We also did site visits throughout this to kind of connect people to the landscape and the area that we were talking about. We also did visitor surveys, as I mentioned, in the field. So key takeaways from this, we heard some really big ideas around issues, climate change, environmental impacts. We also heard folks having issues with dog waste or litter and sanitation, habitat fragmentation, limited bike access, smoking, trailhead parking limitations, concerns around equity for visitors, wildfire issues, noise, and parking. And so those were issues that folks recognize that people, when they come to this space, do have on the landscape. And then there was some kind of alignment around desired future conditions, right? People do come to the mountain because they appreciate the environment that it provides and the ecosystems and want to experience that. So there's a net environmental positive outcome that we're looking to achieve. Folks want to conserve and restore and participate in that through stewardship actions, trail volunteerism. We want to be protecting our water quality first and foremost as a water district. We want to be modern. We want to bring stewardship and advance that within the community and think about sustainable practices for our land management, as well as how we connect the community through education and outreach. When we went out into the field and actually conducted intercept surveys to talk with visitors who were out there on the watershed, we did this in 2012, so we were able to use a similar questionnaire to see and compare how people were seeing change on the landscape. Some key takeaways from that were people generally are feeling very safe when they visit the watershed. We had 91% of our visitors, say they felt safe visiting the watershed. 8 didn't respond, and 1% had concerns. So that's an important 1% to hone in on. But generally, that's a good finding that we brought forward from this report. Fire road conditions, over 80% of folks visiting.
Isn't that interesting that how many people showed up at our meetings talking about how unsafe they felt? I'd say it was maybe half. So that shows it most likely was a vast minority that was overexpressed.
Yeah,
I think.
sorry, Jed, you're talking about in the board meetings
Yep.
versus what the surveys show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we hear that in terms of trail conditions and road conditions as well. So when we asked folks in the field who were out there on the day of visiting the watershed, how are the trails and roads, right? Over 80% said they were in fair to good condition or great to good condition. 5 and 3% were in fair. And that is actually pretty aligned with what we were seeing in 2012, excuse me. And we've done a lot of work. I think we could hold ourselves to a higher standard and see that we can continue to improve upon that. I aspire to say that we can have the best roads and trails in, California at best, if not, the nation. And then interactions with other visitors, right? We hear that there's, a lot of conflict at times and there's concern around conflict. But when we actually ask people out in the field, most folks are having a good to great time on the watershed. And if you visited recently on a weekday, you probably, have had the watershed to yourself as well. So hopefully you're kind to yourself and had a good experience. The feasibility study, there's some kind of key takeaways, and those were to support community-based stewardship to reduce the visitor impacts on water quality and restore and protect our biodiversity. There's an interest in maintaining a sustainable network of roads and trails that support various visitor goals and preserving the watershed's ecological function. And then what we're doing today is really, driving forward with this adaptive management of our current roads and trails management plan and responding to those changing environmental and visitor conditions. So since the feasibility study was brought forward, we've been focusing on these ongoing strategic opportunities, which were things that the district could advance immediately, right? So we've been focusing on our habitat restoration, our trail stewardship program, providing additional facilities for visitors such as water stations, bike racks, things of that nature, additional visitor outreach, sustaining our biological monitoring programs that we have in place, thinking about new ways to engage the community and community science. We've updated our watershed trail map for visitors. We've been looking towards improving watershed signage. One of our first ones is at Leo T. Cronin to highlight the restoration work going on in Lagunitas Creek. And then there are future opportunities, which we're at today. And the yellow one really encompasses all of this, which is updating the roads and trails management plan. And the core components of that, which we'll keep speaking to, include thinking about our Project Restore, our social trail management strategies, what our we want the focus to be moving forward, our current regulations and policies, what does multi-use connections look like for various visitors, and restroom parking lot facilities, thinking about how people get there and how we support them while they're on the watershed. So that's where we're going next. We're going to highlight and key in on where we as staff are thinking about going in terms of the update and being very strategic in this update, and also welcoming input on how we're going to proceed. So the roads and trails management plan is fairly focused, right? We've talked about some of the areas that people brought forward in the feasibility study having an interest in, and they really do align with the sections of the road and trail plan. It gives us standards to maintain our roads and trail system. It defines our roads and trails, provides an adaptive framework and a work plan. And those are the areas that we want to continue to carry forward as we move on through this planning effort. So we've mapped our roads and trails. We know where they are. We're not starting from scratch, so we want to bring that forward. There's been inventories and a development of a classification system, which is something we think can be reviewed, but generally carried forward. Our road standards that we've developed, those are still relevant, but we can refresh some of kind of the figures that go along with it, and also probably integrate some other best management practices that we see other land management entities employing. And then think about kind of best management practices for protecting water quality and reducing erosion of roads and trails. The social management strategy and criteria is something that we really want to bring forward and continue with, but we have some work to do to refine where we want to go in the future. And then think about monitoring and adaptive management. So how we can kind of measure ourselves as we progress through this work plan and approach. So the areas, and this going back to, we are standing on this work that we did in our feasibility study. There are areas that the community wanted us to investigate further, and that's what we're hoping to do through this update. Some of those are defining our social trail priorities. Right now, we have a loose criteria, and we might want to kind of hone in on some areas of sensitivity where we could have the largest environmental benefit from doing some of our social trail management. I do want to emphasize those social trails have been established over, the history of the mountain being used by people, and people use social trails, and our policies allow people to go explore the watershed, and it connects them to places that are meaningful to them. So there's probably a strategy we want to think about in terms of managing those social trails. Some of those could become system trails. Some of them can be restored. Some of them could be decommissioned. But we have to recognize that when people use the social trails, they're using it for a reason, right? There's something not being provided. And so we want to think about that as we think about our social trail management strategy.
So I just want to hang up on this point for a second, because you brought up a couple things. So our policy says they can explore the watershed, users, but not all users.
That'd be correct, yeah.
So anyone who's hiking can explore wherever based on our policy. Okay. Interesting.
Unless there's a sign saying it's closed.
Right.
So that's where it becomes limiting.
And for more of a specific example, the effort that was put in by your staff to make sure we protect Azalea Hill sensitive habitat from social trails with Liberty Gulch Trail. Have we looked at that area post Liberty Gulch going live, and have we seen resurgence at all of social trails?
Yeah, so we're at a complicated part of that project where Liberty Gulch has been opened, yes, but the hiking trail up and over for equestrian and hiking is still under construction. Okay. So it does exist, but we're improving that. We started early on closing those social trails, like passively by signage and trying to block the entrances to them. We're still seeing some use, but the next year is really going to be our focus of hard closures, split rail fences and material. Due to the sensitivity of some of the serpentine habitat up there, we're trying to limit the amount of ground disturbing activities while we close it so we can protect those resources.
Great, thank you.
So in addition to, or key areas to investigate also include bike standards. So as we have road management standards and trail management standards, we want to develop one for bike standards for access on a single track trail. We want to evaluate trail standard specifications to ensure that we can develop something here that can establish a sustainable trail. Thinking through the classification structure and what the community and board would like to see in terms of bike access, and trying to define some mileage for that. And then thinking, are there roads that we can convert to trails, right? We can reduce the environmental footprint of our visitors by doing road to trail conversion. There's some interesting opportunities on the watershed for that. There's discussion, and we tried to advance this through our pilot program around shared use and how folks might be able to share those with alternating days of the week or other directional strategies. So that's something for discussion. And then social trail conversion, right? There might be opportunities similar to Liberty Gulch and Azalea Hill, where if you can close some social trails, you might be able to adopt some social trails into the system, or you can find mutual like restoration opportunities through advancing some of that. And really thinking about that in terms of making strategic connections on the mountain so that there's logical routes that people would be using. And I think that's a key component to think about as we start evaluating bike access, is we want to have something that folks would like to use so that they're encouraged to go to the sanctioned trail rather than using an unsanctioned trail, similar to how we attempt to manage hiking on the watershed as well. Visitor management is going to be core to this. We're thinking more broadly than we were in our 2005 plan around how we can engage visitors from a volunteer perspective in stewardship actions, how we can support and promote environmental education programs. And then there's other visitor management components that our rangers will be thinking about in terms of regulation updates. And then a monitoring and adaptive framework will underpin all of this. So where are we going? We are proposing to have a community open house and workshop. And I want to emphasize the open house component of this because we want to create a different planning setting in this first step. And we really want to front load this planning effort where we can get a lot of community input on the front end, because we do, again, stand on the foundation of this feasibility study is getting that early input from where folks would like to see the district going and key issues to take care of. And now we want to kind of put pen to paper and start to think about what are the core components of this plan update. And so the thinking is that we would have a workshop over a Sunday and a Monday, about a 3-hour block likely, trying to be inclusive of folks' availability. We'd have 3 key stations set up at Sky Oaks. Hopefully, we won't be rained out and we'll have them indoors in our garage facilities, but we'd establish kind of an understanding of the environmental setting of the watershed in our first station, and then start to explore social trail restoration opportunities or stewardship. We'd use the biological information and data that we have to inform folks' thinking around how we can set priorities to have the largest environmental benefit from our management of social trails and reevaluate our criteria for how we're managing those. And we'll set this up as a way for community to provide input into these kind of strategies that would be built into the plan. Similarly, for bike access opportunities, we'd have a station where folks would come and look at all of our existing roads and trails and think through which roads might be viable for conversion to trails, which trails might be suitable for multi-use, which ones could be considered for single use, and identify opportunities for those routes that people would like to use. Finally, the visitor management strategy, really just reviewing and thinking deeply about how we're connecting with the community and what other programs we can support them with and they're interested in, and helping kind of educate them around the watershed's existing resources and engagement. So that's the workshop that we're hoping will front load this entire planning process. And this moves us into the schedule where we're going, right? We're moving our roads and trails plan, which has a lot of our inventory and baseline data that we need. As Director Cush mentioned, we have the BIFIP, which has an incredible environmental analysis that supports our understanding of the watershed. We have existing biological monitoring programs that we've been conducting over the years that we can kind of set up the thinking around how we start to manage visitation. So we would be bringing that community workshop forward in November. We'd be summarizing all of that input and then developing some scenarios to support our thinking around the roads and trails plan and how it would be updated. To help us do that, we're going to bring back a contract to the October 21st board meeting for approval for a consultant to support that process and the environmental review that would go along with it. We're hopeful that the outcomes of that 9th and 10th meeting will give us some scenarios around bike trail routes and standards. It'll give us some opportunities and criteria to think through in terms of social trail management, some new ideas around visitor engagement and management. And then we'd be bringing that as a report out to the Watershed Committee in December. As we report out at that December meeting, we'd be looking for additional input. And that's really going to drive the next step, which is going to be the development of the plan. And I imagine that at that December meeting, we'd also be identifying other touch points, such as site visits that can help people understand those scenarios that we're developing and ways for the community to continue to engage. But this is a pretty aggressive schedule to try to get us the information that we need from the community on the front end to allow for the update of the roads and trails management plan, and then have something in April for us to review collectively as the core elements of that updated plan to support the next step, which would be the environmental review process. So with that, we'll take input from the board and community, and we're hopeful that this is a plan that folks see value in.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Thank you, Carly. I'll open it up for board discussion. Jed, do you want to?
Any comments on the community engagement work that you're doing as a result of the resolution of the lawsuit that we had, and how those meetings have started and how you expect them to be helpful in this process?
So the e-bike issue is a 2-year pilot. There's 8 stakeholder engagement meetings as part of that process. We're going to be moving those forward. We've had one, we have another one next week. I would say that we'll be reporting out on that process as it moves forward. And that'd be a good place for those discussions in terms of how it aligns with this. It's going to kind of come to a decision after the 2-year pilot in terms of what the status of e-bike and the data shows us in terms of how to roll those into our visitor management approach. So visitor engagement or community engagement rather will be a core component of the planning process. Absolutely.
I think the folks who sued us felt like they weren't engaged as much as they wanted to be. So how do you think we can resolve that this next go around so that they do feel engaged and won't sue us again?
I mean, we'll continue to host the same number of meetings that we have in the past and see where we can fill gaps. I think that's the way to do it. December 18th will provide a number of opportunities in terms of when we identify scenarios where maybe bike access or stewardship, social trail. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in field visits. And so I think that's going to be a key piece to keep
I think in
people
the past, they
field.
felt like they were not engaged. So it sounds like we need to do more.
And I think we are continuing to do more.
Okay.
I think, what we tried to outline in that early one is starting in 2019, over the last couple of years, there's been ongoing community engagement. All of those groups have been at those meetings, participating on the CAC, at the workshops, individually met with in their spaces and brought to the watershed. And we'll
Do you think we
continue
can
to
get
do
a
that.
commitment from them to not sue us, or at least to tell us first? Do you think they can say, hey, listen, we might sue you if you don't do this?
I think that's what we're hoping to get out of the site visits really is like, look at the resources with us. Like, let's look at the data that we have. Let's have an honest conversation around if there are impacts or if those impacts are perceived.
Yeah. Okay,
But,
thanks.
Yeah. But we hear the point of ongoing engagement. Yeah.
It's funny, Jed, it's not something that I would think of saying, but it's so relevant.
Just put it out.
Dana?
No, I like it, Jed. I like you might as well just ask the question that we're all wondering about. So, okay, I have a couple of questions and thoughts. Carly, nice to see you. I got to tour the watershed with Carly on Tuesday, so that was kind of nice to get to meet her. Yeah, I would just I would just put a plea out there that people who have strong feelings about this to please show up and use these resources that we are making available to give us input, and let's try and have a constructive discussion. I do want to just state for the record that I personally feel really strongly that we need to figure out a way to have some trails that bikes have access to. I think if for nothing else, it is just time to put this conflict between the hikers and bikers to bed. I have spent oodles of time researching, trying to get some definitive answers on the impact of bikes versus hikers versus horses. For every study that says one thing, there's another study that says something else. The truth is that our presence on the watershed has an impact. And I frankly think it's a little bit arrogant to say that we don't have an impact hiking, but we have an impact biking, or for that matter, we don't have an impact biking, but we do on the horses or vice versa. We have an impact. There's a trade-off. We're having to make a compromise essentially on enjoying the watershed versus protecting the watershed. It's really hard to do both things and have there not be some impact. So there has to be a balance of trying to protect the watershed as much as we can and also acknowledge that we live in a beautiful place and people want to engage with the watershed. So I just want to say I think that should be a priority. I think that if it means having some trails that are bike only because of safety issues, I absolutely support that. And I honestly think we need to look at all the trails. I think some of those trails probably shouldn't have bikers or hikers on them at certain times, like after it rains, if there is a problem with erosion, that kind of a thing. So I really think we should either put it all on the table or we need to not allow anyone to have access. But I just want to state for the record that I do think there has to be a way to get this conflict put to bed. So that would be one of my key agenda items. I also wondered, Sean, if you could just update us on the BAT study, the costs, and if that started yet, and what you anticipate what kind of data we're going to get from that.
Yeah, so the BAT study is part of the e-bike pilot that we're advancing. The BAT study is I would say continuation of some initial work that the One TAM partnership was doing with USGS around looking at bats on the watershed and broadly, and specifically what species were there. The study that was developed as part of the e-bike settlement includes analyzing bat acoustics throughout the watershed in a grid pattern that's aligned with this kind of national data collection effort. It'll provide us with important information around what species are using what habitats on the watershed and what areas, and where those habitats are adjacent to roads, what we're seeing in those areas as well, and comparing that to more remote areas. And so that'll be a good baseline for understanding. It's similar to what the district did when we adopted our initial vegetation management plan, and we actually developed a triannual land bird monitoring. And that land bird monitoring data set has been really helpful for helping the district assess how our vegetation management and other management actions and stewardship have an influence on wildlife. And so the BAT study total is about $240,000 or so. It's started. We've done our first quarter of collection, and we're starting our next quarter next month. So these acoustic monitoring data collection efforts happen on a quarterly basis. And we'll report out. Our intention is to bring the first year of monitoring back to the Watershed Committee once that's been completed for a report out.
Great.
In terms of the Roads and Trails Management Plan, just to speak to one interesting thing that I noted as we were reviewing and preparing, was our trail classification also defines the level of management required. And others in this room could kind of educate us on the history of, debate between hiker and equestrian that was occurring around management or use of the watershed. And what you find in that trail classification is that our equestrian trails is requiring a higher level of management and maintenance. And we see that. We do a ton of stewardship on our equestrian trails every year to support that type of access. So I think to your point of which has the bigger impact, I think what we know from the science is that people influence wildlife, and people being on trails influence wildlife. And so the mode maybe isn't as important. It's more of the stewardship actions that are combined with that mode to support that access.
And then how much are we talking about the consultant that we're talking about? Could you just give us a little more clarity on what that person, so are they essentially going to be the organizer who's going to be, out there sort of shepherding people through the, looking at the site and taking an input, or what exactly are they going to be doing, and how much are we talking about in terms of a spend for that?
Yeah, we're waiting for proposals to really understand the total cost. The environmental review for something like this is a significant undertaking, and the level of studies that we'll be doing on the various trails that we're considering, whether they ultimately come forward or not, is going to be significant. So there's going to be a lot of field work and biological data collection and review, as well as physical conditions assessment, thinking about erosion, where streams are, all of that data is going to be collected and brought into this process. So that's a tremendous amount of work that we'll be doing. The plan update is the core component, right? So this consultant team would come in, look at what we have, try to bring that standard up to kind of a modern framework. And then we'd be having some facilitation support. But I think what we understand from our past practices is that our staff who know the watershed are probably best positioned to help the community have the discussion and talk through kind of how we can engage them. So we'll continue to play that role. And this consultant will provide kind of that backbone support for doing a lot of the field work to drive the environmental review that we hope can kind of bring this plan to fruition.
Great. I don't have anything more. Just please continue to let me know how I can be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. Matt?
Carly, welcome. And Sean, thank you for the presentation and for putting together this plan as we go through here. And thank you for the update on the data collection for the e-bike pilot. We've looked at using data sets around nesting birds post work done for fire work on the watershed, mechanical vegetation, prescribed fire, everything in between. And we're seeing healthy results from that. Now, from my layperson position, that kind of disruption on the watershed is exponentially more than a bike on a trail. And if we're not finding huge disruptions from huge impacts to the environment with much bigger interruptions in what's going on, and we're seeing return of good things, I'm having a hard time understanding how this is going to be a continuous or a massive environmental impact if we're already doing other things that aren't having the effects that we're being fear-mongered into understanding. So again, support using the data for that. And the other part, you mentioned the word aggressive schedule on this. This is a 10-year process. I mean, this is not aggressive. We are still, we're tranching through almost a decade of trying to solve this problem. And so we should be at this pace moving forward. So I support the speed at this. And especially when we're driving to a couple of things, you look at the road and trails management plan, classifications 6 through 10, I couldn't find the word bike in there at all. So 80% of those spots are filled and 80% are dedicated to two user groups, basically. So we're looking at redefining one class or 20% of what we're looking at here. So it's gonna be important to understand the definition of that, and something with the word bike and accessible or allowable in there is gonna be important for me to see that. And then the other big thing that we want to get right is, I think, from a holistic perspective, regardless of user type, is the understanding of how we either decommission or adopt social trails into the system. Because the walking around, going off wherever is just, it's got to drive you guys nuts, and especially the environmental impact, because there's not a sign up that says if you use a social trail, you'll be walking through serpentine habitat, potentially damaging protected plants and scaring away protected species. But that potentially could come up. But the work you guys are doing to actually bring these trails into the system reduces that part of the equation, which is important for everybody. And looking at it from that way, every user group has the ability to come and contribute, come and participate, come and comment, so that their needs are looked at and their needs are met too. And whether their needs are personal or more holistically looking to protect the environment, I think doesn't matter. It's an opportunity to do that. Because if you go to slides 9 and 10, and I don't want to harp on the public input too much, but I don't know how many hundreds of hours were spent on getting public input, and so to hear the excuse of we weren't engaged or we didn't do all the time, I'll hear it for a little bit, but you look at how many meetings were held and how much input was done. At what point do we can't do anymore? And I think that's an important one to look at too. So we have set up community meetings. We have identified areas to engage. Folks that are passionate about this or want to contribute, now is the time to do that, because we are going to be looking to redefine Class 10 and then also look to do the social trail piece. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Larry, I know you came in late, but
I've been listening all the time.
any inputs?
Yeah, I have several. I don't know that there's ever a time you can't do any more. I think you can always reach out further and engage people in a different way. Also, I think it's important to remember that we have something like 10 times the user base for hikers to other activities. Probably even higher, maybe it's 100 to 1 for us.
Larry, can you explain what you just said? Sorry, it's Diana over here.
About what?
What you were saying about the hiking, the base?
Yeah, that there's something like 90,000 hikers and 18,000 bikers, something like that.
Got it.
I don't know exact numbers, but those are the ones
Yes,
that,
so I can kind of clarify from what we found in the visitors study was, and this was 2012 and 2022, was we had about 16 to 20% of our visitors were using a bike, 80%-ish were hiking, and then we had a small, 1 to 2% were equestrians.
well, that would jive with the 90,000, 18,000. So I think that part is important. I don't know how to address that part. And that's been kind of a stumbling block the entire time this has gone on. And your comment, Diana, about the difference between users, I think the most important difference is that the hiker impact is driven by a brain. The brain is right there. The bicycle and the horse depend on the rider to be the intelligent part. It's a little different than when you're actually interacting with your feet. So I think there's more sensitivity from the foot person than there is from the person that's on another vehicle, horse or bike. I think that's really important. And I also like to say, I'd like to compliment you on your words, your choice of words, Sean. I listened very carefully coming over here, and you're artful in your choice of words, and I appreciate that. The other thing I'd like to bring up just briefly is that there have been comments by some of the folks elected in 2022 that the RTMP went off the rails in 2005. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. I don't feel that way, but others have.
Are you meaning when the plan was developed?
That's
So
the only thing I can interpret.
yeah, I was reading through the plan, and it tells us that it was about a 2-year process. It was, it took the district to develop the roads and trails plan. What's really, I would say, impressive about the roads and trails plan is that it's very flexible, which I think was a thoughtful way to develop a plan at that time, in terms of it recognized that we didn't know what capacity the district would have to do any one action at any given time. And so it provided us with a toolkit to be able to maintain a roads and trails system to protect water quality and have the tools we needed to do that on an adaptive approach, recognizing that, right, there were some real kind of issues that needed to be addressed, like redundant social trails or trail roads that were, contributing significant amounts of sediment into waterways. And so there was a real priority placed on that, which I think was a really strong tool. And it allowed us to bring in some grant funding, is my understanding, to support that work, which was key. I think that the issue that we're dealing with today was there in 2005, and it was hard to grapple with then, and it's hard to grapple with now, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that there was a, obvious intention to provide a classification that was not defined to think about solving this issue at some point in time. So I think that's maybe where it fell short for some people in the community, is that it could have been brought in at that point. And we have since brought it in, right? There was an incredible planning effort with the community and past staff to develop the Azalea Hill project, which was really trying to make use of some of our social trails as multi-use access for bikes and putting them in a place that they were not, and really providing an important connection that was, driven in part by safety. And then the plan brought forward an approach to protect resources where we could, and really intentional plan to protect streams as well.
I think you hit it right on the head when you said that there was a complicating factor in that the e-bikes, or maybe Ben said this, I don't quite remember, one of you, that there were e-bikes already on the watershed. And we're coming off of Sweeney's decision, unsupported, undiscussed. He just made the decision that e-bikes were not allowed on the watershed because they were motor vehicles. He used the existing wording to put out a dictate flat out. It's over. And that landed kind of hard on a lot of folks on both sides of the equation. So there was a lot of shuffling trying to address all the issues, especially that latter one or that prior one of the fact that the bikes are already here. And what do we do about it? Then the ADA issue kicked in, and that made it even more complicated because we were being legally advised that we may not be able to do anything, regardless of what our thoughts might be, because we can't restrict those folks. And I'm a little surprised that there aren't more bicycle folks in the audience. I thought there would be, but I don't know. Maybe we've satisfied their need for the moment. Maybe not. Maybe there will be next time.
Yeah, I think we'll get a lot of participation at the workshop we're hosting in November on the watershed.
Thanks, Larry. Just we want to see progress on this issue of increasing bike access. We have concerns as to whether we can achieve that, or at least how quickly we can achieve that, and whether we can do it in alignment with other stakeholder priorities. We will, and we can. The reason I think that is this has all happened in the past, right? Nona Dennis told me that there was a period in the history of the watershed when the exact same discussions were being held regarding access for horseback riders. The arguments were as contentious, the concerns were as strong. And that issue was resolved, apparently in a way that satisfied all of the stakeholders at the time. And we no longer even consider it as a substantial concern for the watershed. I think, Matt, you once said snowboarding snowboarders were probably a similar issue at one point on ski slopes. Not something that, I think we think much about now, that those things have been resolved. So we are going to get there. And probably the big question is just how efficient can we be in this? Because as I said earlier, the efficiency issue is not so much because we want to say the priority is satisfying certain groups' recreational, passions or needs. The real driver here is that the longer we continue to sit and talk in rooms, the more that, time goes when recreation is not managed on the watershed as effectively as it should be. And that's longer that the environment pays the price. That was my biggest concern, probably my biggest, the point I felt saddest about with respect to the lawsuit is that it focused on process and not on environmental impacts resulting from our actions. So Sean, just so coming back to this point of speed and efficiency, I say this is just, when we hear about some stakeholder groups, the environmental organizations feeling like they were not engaged or didn't have the opportunity to provide input and participate, my feeling is that was largely focused on the selection of trails for the pilot study. That we proposed a set of trails, 6 miles for the pilot, and they felt they didn't have enough time to review those, and then raised a lot of issues about whether environmental review was also required in order to do a pilot. So Sean, I think that's something that obviously we want to address this time. And so that point then also tying that into moving quickly. At our next Watershed Committee meeting on December 18th, are we going to be, by that point, in addition to the objectives that you've outlined, are we going to be ready to discuss a set of trails for all of, and all the options, social trails that might be now targeted for development for either multi-use or single-use purposes, conversion of existing trails to either multi-use or single-use? Are we going to be ready to discuss that list And will that then drive the environmental, the EIR that we're going to take on afterwards?
Yes, so the intention of the workshop and open house at Sky Oaks is to get that input from the community in a collective way. And then we'll develop scenarios based on what we receive from the community. So, if you come in and give us that every trail should be opened or every trail should be closed, that's a pretty extreme position to be having. We'll find a middle ground and different scenarios for those middle grounds organized around kind of existing environmental review and data that we have and trail condition assessments. So there will be a filter from all the inputs that we get, and we'll bring forward some scenarios for you all and the community to review and discuss, right? And we're going to be putting this within the context of kind of how quickly things could be moved forward, how complex things are going to be. So there's going to be a reality that some trails that people really want to see are going to be extremely complex to even think about in terms of change of use or doing any sort of management on. There's going to be other ones that are maybe a very real opportunity in terms of providing a change of use or different access quicker because of their environmental setting, right? And so that's what the filter that we're going to use our staff knowledge for, but we're going to take the input received from the community and bring forward a bunch of scenarios around bike access, around social trails that could be considered for connections, around roads that can be converted to trails, around existing trails. And similarly, we're going to bring forward scenarios around how the community would like to see social trails considered and managed. And so that can be kind of prioritizing areas of the most sensitive zones on the watershed to areas where there's the most egregious erosion or other contributing factors. And so that's how we envision kind of filtering all of that community input into something digestible and that will then be used to drive the environmental review. So there's like kind of one more, I guess, opportunity to provide direction in terms of scenarios that you really want to invest in for the environmental review. And then that'll kind of help define and drive the scope of the project.
Okay. All right. So we'll have those the priority lists or options that have emerged from the stakeholder discussions, and we'll be starting to narrow down to the elements that we want to focus on for the EIR. And then the plan is to have the EIR completed by the summer or fall of next year.
And I think we'll have a lot stronger level of clarity around the schedule for that once we know the scope of the project. Because if you can imagine, if we're conducting the necessary surveys and studies on 150 miles of trail, which would be our whole system, it's going to take a very long time. If we can narrow that scope to something that's more actionable and thoughtful, we'll be able to be more efficient with that next step.
Just a quick follow-up request. So hitting into the November workshops, making it very clear to anyone as part of the invite is if there's information you're looking for that's going to help just feed the decision in December, make sure everybody is aware of it and is prepared to bring it to those workshops or prepared to bring what they would like to see.
And then, Sean, at what point will we be, do you feel like the updates to the RTMP will be completed? And we can sort of move into just a programmatic cycle in the way that we operate with the BIFIP.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be driven by how quickly we can come up with an updated plan. Once we have the updated plan, the level of environmental review will then dictate kind of the overall timeline. Generally, and this is kind of a very broad statement, but you hear folks kind of scope a full environmental review to be 18 to 24 months. So, put that on the back of the plan development. And that's kind of what we're trying to manage here is move quickly towards the plan and recognize there's time for the environmental review. There's also seasonality of some of the data that we're going to have to collect is going to be seasonally specific. So yes, we'll have as much information as we can bring forward at the November meeting. And we appreciate that it's not going to be everything and absolutely everything that folks would like to see on every single trail, right? That level of kind of granularity is going to come once we have those scenarios, and then it's going to drive our field work.
So achieving real progress on December 18th in terms of identifying what we want to focus on with respect to trail access so that we can then kick off the EIR and because that, as you say, is going to take some time. So we really, December 18th is sort of an important milestone for us in moving this forward. Great. Thanks a lot, again, for the updates. Terry, if we could go to public comment, please.
Yes, we have 4 so far. The first 3 speakers, Larry Minigas, Bill Keene, and Krista Hoff.
Yeah, good morning, and Sean, thank you for the presentation. The RTMP should be there to inform the recreation plan. The RTMP should be looking at infrastructure the same way the district has been looking at infrastructure in the built environment, so that you can inform both the RTMP, the Recreation Management Plan, and the BIFIP. And I want to point out that one important shortcoming in the RTMP update is a lack of focus on wildfire preparedness. There is only 2 words around emergency response in this presentation. We know that a major fire event in the Mount Tamalpais watershed is not a matter of if, but when. The updated plan should anticipate this reality by incorporating road hardening and fire resilience into its priorities. Roads and fire roads need to be designed and maintained not only to reduce erosion and protect water quality, but also to withstand the stresses of emergency use during a wildfire. This means hardened surfaces, adequate clearances, and strategically placed turnouts for firefighting equipment and evacuation. I'm urging the district to include fire resilience as a key criterion for prioritizing road and trail upgrades, and to integrate wildfire scenario modeling so that we know which roads are truly critical for protecting water supply and public safety during an emergency. If we go too far looking at the RTMP as a recreation plan, we're going to miss a really important part of infrastructure here. And I think that's what's critical. And I would have appreciated hearing more about that during this meeting this morning. It seems we focus completely on recreation, and that is pulling us in a direction that perhaps takes away from the other important pieces, because as I've said in the past, if we have a major fire in there, you can throw the recreation plan out the door, because we're going to have to close the watershed until it's safe again for people. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bill Keene.
Good morning. Thanks, board, for having this meeting. I think it's great to continue this conversation. First and foremost, I want to thank staff for all they've done. They have done an amazing job. Tons of outreach. I mean, more outreach than I ever saw when I was working in Sonoma County on trail stuff. So my hat's off to them, and I appreciate your board wanting to continue that. I think it's important to distinguish between the BIFIP and this. The BIFIP covers the fire stuff. This covers recreation. So I think keeping those in their right boxes makes sense to me. Larry, you mentioned where are the bikers? Well, I represent 3,500 bikers as the Director of Advocacy of Access for Bikes, 100 of which asked me, do I need to go to this meeting? I'm sparing you that. So yes, we would have had this room filled if we needed to.
You were sitting out of sight, Bill. I couldn't actually.
Oh yeah.
Around the corner.
I wanted to, Director Meyer mentioned hikers versus bikers. Well, that would be me having conflict against myself, because I probably spend about 50% hiking and 50% biking. Let's be clear here. It's a conflict between environmental groups and the biking community. Let's call it what it is. We would have bikes on the watershed on trails if we didn't have those lawsuits, and those came from 3 environmental groups. With regard to the trails, somebody mentioned horses, and that was a big battle way back when. They have 22 miles of trails. Let's do that. Let's do 22 miles of trails that bikes could be on. Let's find the right place to do it. Let's look at road to trail conversions. Let's look at social trails or non-system trails. Let's figure out what those 22 miles of trails get us. And what I would suggest the biking community wants is, we want to have safety. We don't want to be on fire roads. They're dangerous. We don't want to be on paved roads. They're dangerous. We want connectivity, so we want to be able to get around the mountain, and we want to be able to have a user experience. It'd be awesome if we could do road to trail conversion and look at some trails and have something that goes from the top of the mountain down to the bottom of the mountain. It'd be great if we had something that helped us circumnavigate the mountain. And if we want the more bike only use, maybe we do those in areas like off Pine Mountain, in that area, somewhere where we don't see a lot of hikers. So I think there's ways to get there. And as for social trails, if we're going to decommission social trails, let's start with the worst, the ones that are along creeks. As an example, like Swede George Creek, there's ones that go along the creek and cross the creek. To me, those would be high priority. And let's look at high functioning non-trails for single use.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Keene. Ms. Krista Hoff, please. And then Nona Dennis.
Hi, I'm Krista Hoff, MCBC's off-road director. Thank you to the district for launching this update to the RTMP and for the presentation and the thoughtful comments from the board. This represents an opportunity to bring the watershed management, public access, and ecological restoration into better alignment with today's needs. It's reassuring to see that the data presented was sort of supporting a better experience on the watershed by users than is sometimes expressed in these meetings. Additionally, no one is saying that we should rush this process at the expense of the environment. I think we can all see that your diligent efforts to document what we have, the resources that we have been very thorough and thoughtful and plotting a way forward. We could be here today discussing a year of real world data collected through that trail sharing program. We could have real science that we could analyze and use to inform the recreation access and how we should expand it going forward. And multiple times during the recreation planning process, and even more recently after litigation, MCBC has reached out to those groups, to the conservation groups, in an effort to understand our common ground and how we could move forward. They have repeatedly denied our requests and will not meet to discuss a way forward or how we could work together. Instead of lamenting the opportunity lost, I look forward to this next step and a fresh opportunity to collaborate with all user groups and those groups as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nona Dennis, and if you can please speak up, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you speak a
Okay.
little bit louder, though?
Okay. I want to thank you for a very thorough discussion, a very thorough outline, Sean. Even your preamble, Director Kush, was informative. I wish we had heard this 3 years ago at least, maybe even 4 years ago. From the outset, the litigants, and I want to sort of limit ourselves, yes, we were litigants, but we have been participants in activities and decisions on the watershed for many decades. If we had heard you say that you wanted to take a programmatic approach by starting with the incredible data that you already have in the road and trail management plan and update it so that it's relevant to today's world, we would have said hurrah, and we asked for that repeatedly and were ignored. So now we have it, and we can't go back 3 or 4 years to make up for an awful lot of talk, a lot of outreach, but not toward a concrete opportunity to look at the need for trails, the need for inclusion of bikes on trails that they've been withheld from in a programmatic way, so that we do not just have a one-off, as you described it, in Liberty Gulch, which is a magnificent trail that has been, the whole program for Azalea Hill is really excellent, comprehensive, and so forth. We also perhaps looked at the shared trail management, the pilots, as one-off times 9, without the kind of programmatic approach that we feel is needed. The road trail management plan could be like the one that the county developed some to more than 10 years ago, in which they have done a programmatic EIR that allows them then to look at all possible things that could happen, impacts, and go forward with projects one at a time, thoroughly vetted, thoroughly discussed. We look forward to that kind of approach going forward now, and we will be incredibly cooperative in working with you through that. The problem with the plan was that it said there were harms, there were threats, there were impacts from trails, but there was no agency. No person, not a biker, not a hiker, not a horse was mentioned in the Road and Trails Management Plan. We have to bring agency forward so that we know that we have met the enemy and it is us. And we need to work together to find a way, in a programmatic way, systematic, to go forward. And I think that you've laid out a schedule which can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dennis. Next, we have Vernon Huffman and then Tom Boss.
Thank you. I also, Vernon Huffman, Executive Director of Access for Bikes, and I'd also like to thank staff for preparing for today and getting us moving forward again after the setback, the litigation and the settlement. Two quick stories for you, because I've been doing this a long time. I was at the RTMP meetings in 2005, and just a quick story for you. Recreation wasn't being addressed, and I put a map in front of one of your staff members, Steve Petterly, and I asked him, what about recreation? Can we talk about bikes on trails? And he said to me directly, no, that is too complicated. We're not addressing that during this RTMP. So, unfortunately, that was the answer, and here we are. And I'm very glad that we're addressing bikes on trails and recreation, because the numbers have only increased, as we've discussed, and the bikes and their impact socially on the mountain are there, and we need to address it, and we need to do it fairly. I like Bill's suggestion. If the horses have 22 miles of trails, and they're only 1% of the user group, and we're 30% of the user group, what would we get? Would we get 20 miles, 40 miles, 60 miles? I don't know what it looks like, but it should be fair. Another quick story. I was also involved in the California State Parks change in use process. And they're right here in Marin, they proposed to open Bill's Trail out in Samuel P. Taylor State Parks to bikes. And what happened immediately was that the Marin Conservation League sued them, and the California State Parks went and retracted, and they had to regroup and say, now what do we do? So California State Parks came up with a programmatic approach to change in use in the entire state of California. And they produced a plan that was certified, I believe, in about 2012. And what's very interesting in the plan is it says, in the preamble to the plan, it says, while conflict is often reported, it is rarely substantiated. And that's a very important statement, because it really does sum up a lot of what has happened in these public meetings for the RMP. We hear about conflict, but the actual reality that Sean reported earlier is people are happy in the watershed. And what we have to do is remember that the watershed is its own thing, and board meetings are their own thing. So somehow we've got to transition to the reality that people are generally pretty happy out there. And in summary, Bill's Trail, if you haven't been on it, please go use it. It's open to bikes now, and it's working, and there's no conflict. Thank you.
Mr. Boss, please, if you can please speak up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Good morning, directors. Just tearing off of what Larry was suggesting about fire-hardened surfaces, I wanted to draw your attention to a prescription for fire-hardened trails that was created by the Sierra Buttes Trail Stewardship in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. CAL FIRE is now embracing it and applying it to trails and roads on forests they manage. And I encourage you to take a look at it. And I saw a presentation recently and they point out multiple benefits, including firefighters being able to use these fire hardened trails and roads to fight fires. They often become a fire break. There's been examples of fires ending at these treated areas. And then also it allows often for trails to reopen after a fire event quicker than without. So take a look at that. It's fire hardened trails, Sierra Buttes, and Forest Service.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Thanks, everybody, for your inputs. Onwards and upwards. Our next Watershed Committee and Special Board meeting is scheduled for December 18th at 9:30 a.m. And we'll continue the RTMP planning update, focusing on the following items: a review of social trail restoration priorities, an evaluation of bike access scenarios and standards. Sean, I think as we were just discussing, that may include identification of priority trails for bike access, and then considerations for visitor engagement, stewardship, and management. Thank you, everyone. Our Watershed Committee and Special Board meeting of September 18, 2025 is now adjourned.